Okay, buen día y bienvenidos y bienvenidas. Welcome to El Rincón del Profe Jeff. Thanks for joining me today for another episode in our journey through Latin America and Spanish-speaking countries. As we continue today, as in the past, as we've talked about, if you need any kind of reference to where we're going to visit in this episode or any of our different episodes, just check out which hat I'm wearing, and that'll help us to understand where we're going to be. So you can see by the hat today, it says Argentina. You'll notice the colors, at least on this hat and most of the hats that I have, which are kind of one of the inspirations for these podcast episodes. And like I said before, if you go into my office, one of these days I'll take a picture, or we'll actually do the podcast from my office. You'll be able to see all of the hats from the different places that people have either sent them to me or that I have been or otherwise acquired the hats. So many of them will show the colors of the flags from those countries, and that's the case for Argentina. You'll see that it's a sky blue and white color, and right in the middle is a golden or yellow sun, in Spanish, el sol, right? And so one of the names that the colors of the flag receive in Argentina is albiceleste. That's the combination of sky blue and white. And actually, that's one of the nicknames for the national soccer team se llama la albiceleste. Okay, so because their jerseys obviously represent the colors of the flag. So, okay, so let's get into our journey through Argentina. And just a reminder, as we established in the very first podcast, if you haven't seen it, go back and check it out, where I introduced the idea that we're going to be exploring the culture of Argentina, or of these different countries. And when we focus on those things, we're going to focus particularly on the three Ps, plus one, we'll call it. Just as a reminder, those things will be products, perspectives, practices, and then we'll always talk about the people, because that's what we really want to focus on, is getting to understand and become acquainted with the people of these places we're going to visit. All right, so let's jump into our trip through Argentina. In all of these podcasts, we start off with a visit through with the map, and so we'll jump there real quick. You can just see where Argentina is here globally. It's found in the southern part of South America. Notice one thing that we need to point out right up here is the equatorial line. It goes through Ecuador, which is one of the countries that we visited in one of our podcast episodes. One thing to remember, that once you do cross the equator into the southern hemisphere, that seasons are flipped. Okay, so for example, in Argentina, there are still the four seasons of fall, winter, spring, and summer, but since we're located in New Mexico in the United States, for us in the winter, so the months of December, January, and February, would be the opposite in Argentina. So that's going to be summertime down there. And so when it's fall here, that's when it's spring there. And when it's spring there, it's fall here. When it's summer there, it's winter here. So that's important to consider, because if you ever think about visiting there, or when you consider what's going on as far as festivals and things like that, you'll picture, well, why is this happening in August, for example? One of the festivals we'll mention, or that you'll see in the video description, talks about a Festival Nacional de la Nieve, the National Snow Festival, and that happens in July and August because that's the middle of winter in Argentina. So if you celebrate Navidad, Christmas, or the holidays in the United States, in Northern Hemisphere, that's going to be in the winter time here, but that's in the summertime in the Southern Hemisphere, and in this case, Argentina. Okay, well, let's take a closer look. Argentina is considered part of what is called the Cono Sur, the Southern Cone, and that includes Argentina, Chile, and Uruguay. Sometimes Bolivia and Paraguay are thrown in there. Paraguay is more often than Bolivia. So you can see that Argentina is bordered on the west by Chile with an important mountain range. Cover some geographical things here. And that would be the Cordillera de los Andes. The Andes mountain range runs from all the way in the north to the south. And on the eastern side, we're going to see that Argentina has border with Uruguay, and in the north up here, northeast, it's going to be bordered by Brazil, and then Paraguay, and kind of in the north central, and in the northwest, there's a border with Bolivia. I want to share the satellite view here just so you can get a contrast to see a little bit about, I like this view just to see where the arid zones are, where the more moisture is exhibited. Maybe down here you'll see in the south that we can see the snow-capped peaks. Those are in both Chile and Argentina. But this helps us understand the different zones. So up here in the north, I'll show a different map here so you can kind of get a better idea of that as well. The southern part down here is going to be the Patagonia, which many of you know about. There, and on all of these areas, I've included video links in the description. I recommend you go and check those out if you're interested in seeing what it looks like. They're all YouTube connections. Up here in the northwest, it's a desert region bordering on the Atacama Desert in Chile, which we cover in our Chile podcast. In the central here, it's called the Cuyo region. In the upper part, the Chaco, because there's actually a state called the Chaco. But it's kind of a place that's in between the desert and what they call the Mesopotamia in Spanish. Don't know how to say it in English. I guess it's Mesopotamia as well, Mesopotamia, because it's between some rivers. Okay, let me change the views. And we'll go here so we can jump in and see a little bit more about some of the important cities. I'm going to talk about what it was like in some of these zones because I lived in many different and traveled through different parts of Argentina. Just to also reiterate that this is the first Latin American country that I was exposed to in my early years, as I mentioned in the very first podcast, and that so I got to experience many different parts and see the geography and the people and how those things were all influenced. So Buenos Aires is the capital. You'll notice it's right here at what we call the Rio de la Plata, and the Rio de la Plata is an estuary, and it includes this area all the way from up here where the Paraná and the Uruguay rivers empty and form what is called the Rio de la Plata, and it goes clear out here to the ocean. This is all considered part of the estuary of the Rio de la Plata. So Montevideo, in our episode on Uruguay, you'll hear me talk about Rio de la Plata, and Montevideo is part of that. So one of the videos I've included in the description actually goes out you take a boat out here and see where the river meets the ocean, and you can tell by the colors. Okay, so Buenos Aires is super important. Obviously, the capital city, in the most important port in Argentina, and actually this region, as far as bringing commodities and things in and exporting. Okay, but the Rio de la Plata is important because it also leads to the interior of the country and even leads up to another country with Paraguay to the north. So the two very important rivers in this part of the country are the Rio Paraná, which runs up here through Rosario, clear up to Asunción, Paraguay, which we talk about in our Paraguay episode, and the river there's a river that continues over here to Iguazu Falls, so it's the border, and also the Uruguay River, which runs down this side. So very fertile lands in Corrientes, Misiones, Entre Rios. That's a province in Argentina. Entre Rios actually means between rivers, so that tells us a little bit of what it's about. Okay, just a couple of interesting notes here. You'll see also in the video description a video that talks about going from Ushuaia, which is the southernmost city in Argentina. It's a place that I lived down here in the Tierra del Fuego province, like I said, the southernmost tip, to a place called La Quiaca, which when we zoom in up here in Jujuy province, that's in the desert. You'll notice that La Quiaca is one of the northernmost cities, actually on the border with Bolivia. And so the video that I've included there, we don't have time to show it in the podcast, but explore it on your own. Definitely, it will show you about the different parts of Argentina, from Ushuaia to La Quiaca and everything in between. So very different climates in all of these places. Let me jump to, before I go to that, let me show you the places that I actually lived in Argentina. One thing I failed to mention, you'll notice the huge, and it's super important to all aspects of Argentinian life, is the coast, the Atlantic coast. You'll see it runs clear up here from Buenos Aires all the way down south into La Patagonia and Tierra del Fuego. So one of the, if not the longest coastlines on the Atlantic coast for countries in South America. Very important beaches up here in the Provincia Buenos Aires province, and then important wildlife and other things, other aspects like petroleum and natural gas in the southern part down here in La Patagonia. I want to point out also in the video description, there's some links to one of my favorite programs. It's the BBC Wildlife, or their Planet series, where they've done a series on life it's called Wild Patagonia. It includes some parts of Chile down here, but it also talks about what it's like to live in the La Patagonia in the southern part of Argentina. Okay, so real quick, let's visit some of the places that I was at in Argentina. Necochea was the first place I lived. It's on the Atlantic coast here. Important port for exporting grains and things from the fertile Pampa. La Pampa in Argentina is an important agricultural production area. There's actually a province called La Pampa, which includes that. There's a dry Pampa and the regular Pampa. Most of the Pampa is actually part of Buenos Aires province, so it's this greater area here. So Necochea on the coast. It's a vacation center for lots of folks, and so you can spend time on the beach in the wintertime, which would be in June, July, August. We were able to see penguins on the beaches there, so that was kind of fun. In the same region here, I also lived in a place called Coronel Pringles, which was right in, I call it middle of La Pampa because the area was surrounded by all types of agriculture. I remember being impressed by the acre upon acre upon acre, or mile upon mile in Argentina, kilómetro por kilómetro of girasoles. Girasol in Spanish is sunflower. Okay, so there are lots of sunflower and wheat and soy, and of course, one of the other things that Argentina is known for is beef and cattle, and that's all in these areas up here and a little bit further to the north, up in Córdoba and Rosario and those areas. One of the places I spent the most time in Argentina was in this center. It's a port city as well called Bahía Blanca. It's actually one of the largest ports besides Buenos Aires, especially noted for receiving all of the exported agricultural products from all of La Pampa. And there's one of the most important naval bases in Argentina is actually right next door in Punta Alta. So there are a lot of naval related things there, a lot of export of petroleum products as well. So going further south, I was able to travel through all of a big part of La Patagonia, actually driving. I drove from this center called Comodoro Rivadavia all the way back up to Bahía Blanca once, or it was a couple of times, and got to see all of these things in between Trelew, Comodoro Rivadavia, Viedma. So around here in Trelew, you might see some in Puerto Madryn. There are colonies of pingüinos, but also these are places where los marinos, sea lions, are found, and elefantes marinos, sea elephants, as well as penguins. People come from all over the world to do whale watching and things along all of these beaches. And Comodoro Rivadavia is one of the centers for petroleum exports, as is most of the southern part of Argentina. I did have the opportunity to travel through what's called El Valle here, and that's kind of like it's along the Rio Negro. It's similar to what we might in the United States compare to like Walla Walla, Washington, the Columbia River Gorge, and all kinds of fruit production, apples, pears, grapes, moving up grapes up into Mendoza. They're famous for the wine. So, all kinds of production going on there. One of the favorite places I visited was San Carlos de Bariloche. Everybody calls it Bariloche. So it's a ski resort town. Well, it's more than that, but it's in the Lake District. Since I'm a lover of chocolate, they had chocolate factories there, so you can imagine I was in heaven. But again, there are videos linked in the video description below. One of the first trips I took in Argentina when I moved from the north to the south, the city that I lived in was in Necochea. The second city that I lived in, I'm not going in order because I jumped to other cities that I'd lived in, was Rio Grande down here in Tierra del Fuego. And the plane flight that I took lasted 12 hours, and we had 11 stops. And they called it the lechero. No? Lechero is like the milkman, and so he went to all the little places. And we crisscrossed the country, went from Bahía Blanca to Viedma and over to Bariloche and down to Esquel and then back over here to Trelew and then to Comodoro Rivadavia, and then we stopped at Puerto Deseado, Puerto San Julian, Puerto Santa Cruz, and Rio Gallegos, and then flew over. These are the Straits of Magellan. I can zoom in here and see if that shows up. I guess it's not going to on the map, but so flew over the point of South America, because Tierra del Fuego is an island separated by from the Estrechos de Magallanes, se llama en español, the Straits of Magellan, to Rio Grande. Okay, so it's on the northern part of Tierra del Fuego. I compared living in La Patagonia and in these parts, which were out here coast to the coast. They're windswept. The wind is blowing all the time, very flat until you get to the mountains over here by Ushuaia and then up more along the border with Chile. It seemed like northern Wyoming and North and South Dakota, the high plains. The temperatures were very similar, and the landscape as well. And then finally, Ushuaia. So as far as when I lived there, many places were visited. Switching directions, I've been back to Argentina several times since that my initial stay there. One summer for us, it was July in the United States. So July in Argentina would be in the middle of winter. We went to Buenos Aires to visit some friends of mine. We stayed with them, and on one opportunity we decided we wanted to go see the Iguazu Falls, and you should check that video out in the video descriptions just to see what kind of a place it is. It's on the border here with Brazil, and also with, there's a picture, it popped up, with Paraguay, and I'll talk about that adventure in a different podcast with Paraguay. But we drove all the way from Buenos Aires up through to Posadas and made it to Iguazu Falls, and that took us about 20 hours driving. And again, that'll be a different episode. Okay, so very varied as far as climates and regions. Let me jump to a different slide here. So I'll just leave that up here for a sec, but you can see that it's divided into the Patagonia, the Cuyo along the Cordillera, the mountain range here, the desert up here in the northwest, the Chaco region. This is called the Pampas. These are the Sierras Pampeanas, so Pampa and mountains together, the dry Pampas. And then over here is the Mesopotamia between the rivers, and then up here in the north it's more subtropical with Misiones. Of course, Argentina does lay claim to some islands in the South Atlantic, which will also be subject of different podcast episodes. Okay, I wanted to just chat for a second. We'll get into I want to visit a little bit about the history, some important dates. Again, we're not going to delve into details in this podcast. It's more of a general podcast that I wanted us to see. And then if you're interested in learning more, I obviously invite you to. If you're participating in this podcast as part of the class, then it's going to be, as part of one of my classes, it's going to be expected of you to participate in some of those things. But just to give some global types of history and influences, in Argentina there are a couple of indigenous groups, Native American groups that we need to recognize and that have had influence on the history of art, and both present and past influences in Argentina. And that would be, there are many, just like there are in many countries, but I wanted to mention a couple in particular. And one would be the Guarani group, and they are in the northeast part of Argentina, where it borders with Paraguay. That's important because of their language influence and the falls into Spanish. And then along the Cordillera, along the mountain range, the Mapuches, who are an important group to talk about. And there are, like I said, there are several, and as we have different episodes, we're going to do an episode just on the Gauchos, and that's an important part of Argentine history and what happened with those indigenous groups as well. But some important dates just to keep in mind. So the first Europeans showed up in the early 1500s, so 1516, 1518, for around there. Buenos Aires, the capital of Argentina, was actually established around 1580. And it, along with some of the neighboring countries like Bolivia and Paraguay, Uruguay, and parts of Brazil, were part of the Virreinato Viceroyalty of Rio de la Plata. So it took it. That's where the estuary got its name. So some important dates that apply to Argentina. There are a couple of, when we talk about as we've talked about many of our Latin American neighbors, many of them have two Independence Days or multiple Independence Days, and that's because many times they have been occupied by different countries with different influence. So a couple of dates I want you to understand would be, let's see, the first one would be 25 de Mayo, May 25th, 1810. And that would be when Argentina declared their independence, or started the independence movement from Spain. And so 25 de Mayo is an important day. Let me turn on the pictures here again. And most towns in Argentina will have either a plaza or a street, una calle named after 25 de Mayo. And this is the Plaza de Mayo in Buenos Aires. It's the most important plaza in Buenos Aires. Lots of things happen here. We'll talk about some political things later on in other podcasts that took any protest or I guess we'll just leave it at that, protest or things like that are important to the people in Argentina take place here in the Plaza de Mayo, because right at this end of the plaza is the Casa Rosada, and that's the president's residence, the president of Argentina. It's off the picture, but over here on this end of the plaza is the Catedral de San Martín, Iglesia de San Martín, which is where the remains of the liberator of Argentina, San Martín, is entombed. You can visit that there. This building in the front is called El Cabildo, which is an important historical building as well. So the Plaza de Mayo, commemorating 25 de Mayo, 1810, when the revolutions began. Another important date in Argentine history would be 9 de Julio, and that's 1816, so July 9th of 1816. Again, in most cities and towns in Argentina will have a street or plaza maybe named 9 de Julio. In Buenos Aires, that happens to be one of the biggest streets in the entire world. This is Avenida 9 de Julio, commemorating 9 de Julio 1816, which is when they formally declared independence. So in Argentina, you get to celebrate two Independence Days. I remember having soccer games with people on 25 de Mayo. Of course, that's entering into the cold months, and obviously 9 de Julio is in the winter time in Argentina. So this is the 9 de Julio, Avenida 9 de Julio, which runs through the heart of Buenos Aires, commemorating those important dates. There are other important dates to talk about, but again, that's not the focus of this podcast, just giving it a general introduction and invite you to learn more about the history of Argentina. We'll talk a little bit more about it when we get into some of the people and practices. Well, one of the funnest things to talk about when we talk about culture are the products of these countries, and so Argentina is no different. I'm gonna scroll through here and get these pictures ready for us to view. So maybe I can ask you, when you think of Argentina, what are some things that pop into mind? Feel free to put those into in the comment area. If you're watching this on YouTube, let me mention to those who are just listening to this podcast, I invite you to go to the YouTube version of this so you can access those videos that we share, that I'm sharing as part of this. So when many people think of Argentina, one of the first things they think of is el tango. And el tango, the tango in English, tango in Espanol, was a dance that started off. This is one of the most famous streets in Buenos Aires. It's called El Caminito. Happens to be in Barrio La Boca section of town, and that's where the Italian immigrants arrived to Argentina. So that's where this dance was born. So that's one that's been exported to many parts of the world. And in fact, they do have in Argentina every year the World Championships. It's the Festival del Tango. Check out the videos in the description. You can get more information on that. And if this interests you, if you're taking one of my classes, if you want to focus on this more, again, we could do a whole episode just on el tango. Okay. One of the other things that many people think of when we think of our products from Argentina is el mate. And here's a picture of what mate looks like. It's an herb. We'll jump out here in a sec. Herbal tea, super high energy. I call it the original energy drink. I know many energy drinks nowadays actually include mate as part of their recipe, but you'll see there the equipment that's used. The middle pile is the yerba, the actual herbal part, and you'll see that it's you drink it by pouring the yerba into the mate. The actual container is called a mate, and then you stick what's called the bombilla, the straw, in there, which strains the yerba, and you pour water into the mate part and any other things you want to add. Sugar for many people, but there are other things as well, so that you can drink your mate. Just by way of interest, I've got here my mate on another episode. We're going to just do an episode on mate by itself. This is a mate commemorating my favorite soccer team. We'll talk about Fútbol, Equipo de Fútbol, Boca. So it's a mate. You would put the yerba, and here's my bag of yerba. You can get that on Amazon. If you want to give it a shot, there's links in the description on what mate is about. And then you put the bombilla in, and then you would drink out of this. It's a super popular drink, participated in by many people. COVID did change how it was done a little bit, because when I was there, this would be something that was shared with family and friends. One mate would be passed amongst many people. But now, not so much from what I've understood. I haven't been to Argentina since after COVID, so I can't testify of this, how it is now, but I have read and seen things about how things have changed because of that. But again, it is an important part of the culture, not just because it's kind of cool to think about and fun to participate in, but it's about connecting with people, just like the dance, the tango was. No? Mate is about getting together and discussing things, whether it's things about politics or sports or literature or whatever you want to talk about. That's what brings people together. Okay, The next product we'll talk about is el asado. We can't talk about Argentina without talking about their asado, which you'll see there is a great spread of meats. Again, meat is an important agricultural product of Argentina, but just like mate and just like tango, it's all about bringing people together, and that's what this does for people. There. Check out some of the videos in the in this video description to see that it's not just something that happens quickly. It's something that's drawn out over long periods where you enjoy each other's company. Maybe you'll drink some mate while you're making your asado, and it's done for families, friends, get-togethers. There's never a bad excuse to get together for an asado. So, again, subject of its own episode. Okay, so we're covered a lot of things. Let me just make sure I get on my notes here to see that we cover everything I wanted to. One of the most important things we have to talk about when talking about products is Fútbol. Fútbol is important to all countries in Latin America, and Argentina is many of you know about Lionel Messi or Diego Maradona. When you talk about Argentina, there are two teams that take the majority of the fandom, we should say, and those are River, and Boca. Okay, this is sharing here the stadium picture for River. I put a great video in the video description about a guy who goes to visit in Argentina when River and Boca play. It's called El Clásico, Super Clásico, because it's the two teams coming together and obviously the biggest fan bases. You'll see that I'm wearing colors from my favorite team, which would be Boca, which is this picture here. This is their stadium. I should say the other stadium, River Stadium, is called El Monumental, and that's actually the home stadium for the Selección Argentina. Argentina's national team plays all of their matches there. They're important matches for qualifying and then friendlies that come in from different places. This is the Bombonera, which is the home stadium for Boca. So yeah, Argentina, loco por el fútbol, no? And just to share, obviously they're famous for recently winning the World Cup in 2022. This is the celebration on 9 de Julio. You may recognize that from the earlier picture. So, you can't not go to Argentina and experience el fútbol. My first experience was actually with football, soccer. I wasn't a big fan of soccer. Didn't know much about it, and that's probably why I wasn't a big fan. But when I lived in Argentina the first time was when Argentina won the World Cup in 1986. Diego Maradona was the leader of that team, and the World Cup was played in Mexico 86. And every game, whether it was part of the round robin or the knockout points, and obviously the quarters, the semis, and the final, the streets were empty in those days because everybody had to go indoors to watch the games. Everything would shut down. And then, of course, when they won, everybody's out on the streets celebrating and dancing around. We'll do an episode just on football in Latin America, and especially in Argentina in this case. But yeah, of course, after that experience, I became a super fan. So, all right, one of the most important subjects when we talk about products from different countries is the music's talks. We're able to talk about the different styles of music, again, and a subject for its own episode. But in the video description, I included a link to my own website at Ep.2, where you can, if you go to the description in this video, you'll see the link there for Listas Top, for the top lists. And I've just linked to the top to lists that are played in Spotify and on Apple Music, so you can go and visit every Spanish-speaking country there, so you can see what's popular today in Argentina as far as what people are streaming through Spotify and Apple Music. Of course, we'll bring up different types of music as we do more episodes on different things. Okay? All right. So some important festivals in Argentina. I mentioned the Festival del Tango. These are things that we would consider the practices of people of these places, and I've provided again links to different festivals. We talked about the Festival Nacional de la Nieve, this National Snow Festival, the World Tango Festival. Important days in Argentina in November, there's the National Day of Culture, or Dia de los Gauchos, when they celebrate the gaucho culture in the region where el vino, where wine is important. In Mendoza, they have a wine harvest festival. So you can please explore and look up different ones on your own if you're interested. Just like every place, there are different types of festivals for different types of things. Music festivals galore. One of the ones that you'll see in the links is, for me, was one of my favorite festivals, was the Festival de Cosquín. Cosquín is a town in Córdoba, in the north central part of Argentina. And it's a festival of folklore, their folklore festival. And so that's where I saw on TV every night during the month in January, February. And it was held for a week or two, and they showed, singing groups, dancing groups, and you get exposed to those types of things. So yeah, check all those out and see which one, share in the comments which one you would like to go see or visit, or if there's one that I didn't include, please share that, and we'll get that out there and known. So now we're going to combine the last two P's. We've covered products, we've covered practices. We're going to talk about perspectives and people, and that will take us to a close for this episode, but it will also give us a springboard for one of the future episodes that I wanted to talk about. So when we talk about perspectives, we can talk about politics and a little bit of history. I'm going to put up on here, to talk a little bit more about some of the people in Argentina. So in the video descriptions below, I want you to check out there's a link on the immigration, where immigrants to Argentina came from, beginning in 1860 to the present time. And it's a time lapse with bar graphs that show the flags and countries where different people immigrated to Argentina. Obviously, the biggest influence came from Spain in the beginning, but after about 1880, the largest influx between 1880 and the early 1900s was an influx of Italian immigrants, and so there's a huge Italian influence in the food, all kinds of pasta, even words from Italian that come into Argentine Spanish. Again, those will be subjects of other episodes in our podcast series, but influences from all over the world. I met people whose ancestors had come from England or from Turkey. The Ottoman Empire had a big immigration, as well as the Eastern Bloc. There a lot of Russians, and back in the day when I was there, it was called Yugoslavia, and I met some Yugoslavian folks. So it's kind of a melting pot from different parts of Europe, Eastern Europe, Middle East, and I think you'll enjoy watching that video that's down in the description. But in the early part of of the 1900s, Argentina was a booming country with a huge economy based on agriculture, especially exporting beef and other products. But after World War II, some important figures came into play in Argentina's history, and we'll throw a picture up here on the screen. And this is Juan Domingo Perón, and this is his wife, Evita Duarte Perón. Some important figures in Argentine history and political history. One of the things we have to talk about, we have to mention that Argentina has had military dictatorships and military presidents. Juan Domingo Perón was one of the first of those in the 40s, and he was actually president 3 times, but very polarizing character. But his first wife, is Evita Perón. You may have heard of her in history. There was a movie made in the early 90s called Evita, and actually Madonna played her in that movie. So I recommend, many of you may not like the actors or actresses that are in it, but it is a pretty good historical movie about this pair, and Perón actually established what is now the Peronist Party, and it's hard for me to say it in English, Los Peronistas. So it is the social changes that he made, and things were so strong that a political party was formed because of him. And so he is a figure in history from the 40s clear up until the 70s. Evita, his first wife, unfortunately passed away due to health issues with cancer in the early 50s. And so, but this is kind of a nostalgic picture from them in the heyday from Argentina. So learn about Peronistas, learn about Evita, learn about Juan Domingo Perón. In the early 70s, he was out of power for many years after the 50s and 60s, and then came back into power in the early 70s. His wife, at that point, her name was Isabel Perón, and after he died, she became president, but she was not president for very long. And as a result of his last presidency came one of the most terrible parts of Argentine history, which was called in Spanish La Guerra Sucia, the Dirty War, which was about the 73, 74, officially 76. In 1976, there became a military junta as they were dictators through that time. And I'm going to do just in a podcast episode on that period of time, because it changed Argentine history forever and had an extreme influence on what happened in those days and actually what's going on now. So yeah, let me just check my notes to make sure I've covered everything. I know this episode's gone a little longer than I'd meant it to, but it's always fun to talk about these things, interesting to talk about these things, remembering that the people and the perspectives are different from one person to another. We experience that in all aspects of society. There are liberal perspectives, conservative perspectives, things in the middle. And here I'll take down Perón as we kind of conclude what we're talking about. But what we need to remember is that the biggest idea with the 3 Ps plus the people, is that we're exploring these things so that we can see in my point of view, I prefer to find how things are what kinds of things we have in common, rather to see the differences. The differences are great, and one of the things that I always talk about with my students is to remember that things are neither good nor bad when we look at perspectives. They're just different from our things. And of course, you can have your own way of judgment. We need to respect the views of others, respect their perspectives, and hopefully they will respect our perspectives. No, that's the idea of coming together as we learn about cultural things and understand perspectives, understand practices, and as we understand products, practices, and perspectives, we'll be able to understand more where people are coming from, right? And that is actually what brings us together more than should divide us, right? So for me, the perspectives that I take away from Argentina, and the Argentinian people, los argentinos, get there's many times stereotypes, and in Latino America, los Argentines have a stereotype of being very egocentric, like nobody's better than us, and that is the case, in many. We can say that, but that's mostly attributed to the idea from the los porteños, as they're known in Argentina, the people from Buenos Aires. But again, that's a stereotype, but it's not how everybody is. Okay. I mean, we can understand that Buenos Aires is the place in Argentina, so that's one reason that helps them to think that. But when you get to know people on the common practices and perspectives, then you understand that it's not really all that. The passion is there, and the ideas are there. What I like to go back to are the simple things that bring people together, the simple things of a mate conversation, an asado on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon, sitting down together to watch partido de fútbol, or just taking strolls or participating in one of the festivals that they're commemorating. That's where we learn about who the people are and what they espouse and what they have to give to our experience, and then what we have to give to their experience. So great. Well, I'd like to bring this episode to a close. As is a custom, I'd like to share some important ideas or quotes from authors. Especially, I like studying Latin American literature. That's what got me into this. And one of my favorite authors is from Argentina. His name is Jorge Luis Borges. There's some links in the description there. I was actually in Argentina when he passed away. Didn't know who he was, but I remember watching his funeral on the national TV in 1986 when he did pass away. So that's my first exposure to him. After coming back, I studied his writings, and he had a work of poetry called El Hacedor. Asador, it would be the barbecue guy. El Hacedor in 1960. And he had a poem called the Poema de los Dones. Just to give you background, Jorge Luis Borges was blind, but he was one of the most prolific and best-known authors in Argentina. And he was actually in charge of the National Library in Argentina. And this kind of refers to that Poema de los Dones. And so let me close with this statement by him from that work. He said, siempre, again, in Spanish first, then in English, siempre imaginé que el paraíso sería algún tipo de biblioteca. So he said, I always imagined that paradise would be some type of library. But in Argentina, el paraíso no solo está en los libros, sino en su cultura, sus paisajes y su gente. And that says in Argentina, paradise is not just in books, but it's in its culture, in its landscape, and we've discovered that, but especially in its people. And that's what I hope we can learn as we discover the culture of Argentina and these other places that we're visiting in Latino America. So that's it for this episode. Please participate in the comment section. Let me know if I need to correct anything. Don't claim to be an expert in all these things. I'm just talking about my experience and things that I've learned over the years. Also, ask questions on other things you'd like to know about Argentina. If you'd like to share things about Argentina, do so as well in the comments below. All right, entonces es todo por hoy. Hasta la próxima. Chao.